how many times in my career I've heard people say, I've never told anyone this before. Mm-hmm. It's like, what an honor to be in a position where someone trusts you with something that they've been unable to talk to other people about.
You can do this job and be healthy in it.
People can actually grow as a result of their struggle.
This podcast shares real stories of transformation and explores what it means to live well through life's challenges.
Hi, and welcome to the Struggle Well podcast. I'm your host for today, Britt Myers, with our guest, Dr. Rich Tedeschi. And Rich, I'm really excited for this conversation today because your work and impact through post-traumatic growth really is the foundation of Boulder Crest programs and a big part of the stories of transformation that we hear from the guests that join this show. So super excited to dive in a little bit more about you, the person today, and of course, to give a plug to the PTG podcast, which we're really excited to be working on alongside you too. So thanks so much for being here.
I look forward to our conversation.
Me too. Well, I feel like from what I've heard of your story, I kind of always pick it up right at you and Dr. Calhoun and when that research really began, but you were a person before that. So I'm curious where you grew up, what part of the country you're from, and kind of what your childhood looked like.
Well, I grew up in Connecticut, in southwestern Connecticut, so about an hour outside of New York City. Mm-hmm. So that's where my family is from on my father's side. My mother's side, she grew up in Chicago, so she was a big city girl.
I love it.
And my family in Connecticut, my father's family, we had a lot of close connections with because my father's one of 9 kids, and they all pretty much stayed in that area, living very close to one another. Mm-hmm. Sort of a big Italian family, and so we saw them a lot, and so it was a very comfortable sort of family situation.
Are you also one of multiple kids?
No, I just have one sister. My older sister, Linda.
They did not want to follow the 9 children tradition.
I guess not.
Said.
No.
Yes.
It's funny because all the 9 children in that family had relatively small families after that, 1 or 2 kids. They didn't go that route. Did
you know pretty early on as a kid what you were hoping to do or maybe where your path was going to take you, or did you sort of kind of figure your way out as you were going?
I think I was convinced I was going to be an engineer.
Okay.
And it's because I like to build things. Mm-hmm. Play with toys that were building things. So that's what I was thinking I was going to do, but obviously it turned out differently.
Yeah. Did that happen once you actually got into college and kind of began studying? Is that sort of where the shift happened, or what sort of drew you into the psychology side?
Well, it's hard for me to remember exactly how that turn happened. But I think there was probably a couple things. One is, and this is probably the more important one, I think I just got used to, in high school especially, being around a group of friends where we were close. And I think I became a part of that group where people like to, talk to me. Mm-hmm. I think I was sort of known as a good guy to talk to or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think there was that. Now, when I was in high school, there was no psychology courses or anything like that. There was nothing of that sort. So I wasn't really introduced to it in any way like that. And I think the other thing was, I started taking courses in chemistry and physics and things like that. And I started thinking, I'm not sure I'm really cut out for this.
Yeah. That's how I felt. I thought at first I wanted to be a nurse. And for one thing, I couldn't handle the sight of blood, which was an immediate problem, as you can imagine. And then the math portion, I just never could. I mean, I would have been overdosing people accidentally all the time. There's the milligrams, milliliters thing would have got me.
I'm glad you were not a nurse.
I know.
Thank
so
the Lord.
Everyone should be glad about that. Did you have any kind of early mentors or people that maybe inspired you, especially once you started to realize like, oh, maybe I'm going to be going down this path?
Well, as an undergraduate, I certainly had some faculty members who were important.
Yeah.
A couple people I think were particularly important who saw and encouraged, my interest in psychology. I had an advisor named Bill Nurkey. another faculty member named Norm Stein. This was at Syracuse University.
Mm-hmm.
And they were both allowed me and got me into taking graduate courses while I was an undergraduate. I mean, that was unusual.
Yeah.
So I was in there with the graduate students taking statistics courses and other kinds of psychology courses, and I loved it. And I did well, and Dr. Stein included me in his graduate research lab.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I was with the graduate students doing research studies, and I felt like those mentors, I think, made a big difference in terms of me going on to graduate study myself.
So what eventually took you a little bit farther down south?
Well, I went to graduate school at Ohio University. And then after Ohio, which of course was a very important experience and people there,
Yeah.
then I got, we have a clinical internship as a psychologist, PhD. You get a year as a clinical intern.
Mm-hmm.
So I was at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the Memorial Hospital there, Department of Psychiatry. So I spent a year there. So that brought me to North Carolina, and then I moved on to faculty position at UNC Charlotte.
Did you meet your now wife somewhere along
Yes.
that time?
Yes. So she's a North Carolinian,
All
and
right.
so we met when I got to Charlotte.
Okay, awesome. And you guys have been married for how long?
Now you're going to
Oh,
trip me
no.
up here. So
We'll
since
cut this
1988,
part.
however long that is.
Yeah. I told you I can't do math. I'm not going to be any help. But she knows. She
Yes.
knows. Okay. And so when you were really starting to get into the psychology work, you meet Dr. Calhoun.
Yeah.
So we have to be close to this time, which is around the 80s, right?
Yes,
And
correct.
that's when really the foundational question came about that led to all of us being here in this room and talking about post-traumatic growth. Just walk me a little bit through what that time of your life was like and the work that you and Dr. Calhoun were doing, because I still find this so interesting. And I know the purpose of the PTG podcast is to dig in more on the science of it, which we will do. But I find it just so interesting that the question was a pretty simple question that you guys were asking, and the answer just came along later that, didn't really seem like it would connect if you were just to look at it on paper, but it really did.
Well, I think now I think back to what the story of this is. There are different pieces of it. So I was doing my research at UNC Charlotte in some very different areas. So I came out of graduate school from Ohio looking at two different things research-wise. I did my dissertation on trust. So that was one thing I had been working on in graduate school, interpersonal trust and how people trust one another or don't,
Mm-hmm.
and how that applies in therapy relationships. So it's what my dissertation was about. And then the other area I was working on was pro-environmental behavior, how people make decisions to act in ways to support the environment, recycle, use public transit, whatever, things like that.
Mhm.
More social psychology. And when I got to Charlotte, I was working with some people there who shared some interest in the pro-environmental behavior stuff. And that's what I was basically doing, which was applied social psychology. And it was good, and I was interested in all, but ultimately not particularly satisfying for me because it didn't really link with what I was doing as a clinical psychologist, which was my training. And I had my own private practice, and I was doing work that way. And so what really happened was I did well enough to get tenure at the university with my research and whatnot. But once you get tenure, it's sort of freeing because you don't have to worry about getting fired so easily. And so it made me think, again, rethink, what do I want to be doing in my career as a psychologist? What really interests me? And that's where Lawrence Calhoun and I started to have conversations about, what would be the coolest thing to do or the funnest thing to do as a psychologist? Basically, have fun with your work,
Yeah.
and do things that are really interesting. So,
Did he have tenure too, or is he
yes,
risking?
yes.
Okay.
And he's a little older than me.
Okay.
And so, yeah, he had tenure. And he was doing work on crisis, how people respond to crisis,
Like, in what way?
personal crises of any kind. And he had written a book with another faculty member we had there, Jim Selby, called Dealing with Crisis.
Okay.
And so, and we had also done a little work in an area that he really knew more about than I did, which was um, what happens to the people who are the family members of people who kill themselves, and what happens to those family members. So he was really very much working in that area of crisis and trauma in a way. And I was starting to get involved more with doing some of that work on in that area. So that was starting to become a focus. And then I was talking to Lawrence about how I was really interested in the best of people. He was looking at how things go badly.
Yeah.
And I said, in kind of my background in psychology, I'd been exposed to the whole idea of people who, in the terms of the humanistic psychologist, actualize, become their best selves. And that comes out of Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow and these humanistic psychologists. And I had some background in that when I was in graduate school and on internship. So those were our conversations. And I basically said, I'm really interested in how people become wise, how wisdom accrues to people in life, how that all happens. And so we decided to start our research by focusing on that area, but coming out of these two things, the idea of crisis in people's lives and also the idea of how people grow and develop and actualize, that becomes their best self, make the most of their potential. So those were the seeds of it. And that's how we got into starting our work with just doing interviews of people who had been through difficult things in life, but who had done well, sort of combining our interests in this way. And frankly, as I'm telling you this now, this is the first time I've really put it together that way, actually.
Yeah.
I thought about what Lawrence was doing and what I was interested in and how all this was kind of melded together. This is where, at Boulder Crest in our programs, one of the most important things we do is we help people start to understand their life story. What's their narrative? What's their story? And that's a creative endeavor, putting together the pieces of things that happen in your life and trying to see it as a connected story. And that's kind of what I'm doing with you now.
Yeah.
And I just sort of thought more, I don't know, consciously about this piece of it and how that might have happened that way. If that's the real truth of it, I don't know. But now I'm thinking that maybe
now that
maybe
you
that's
said
how.
it,
Maybe
that
that's
sounds
part
good.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think I want to be careful about how I kind of tee up or ask this question because I'm still learning too. And I know there is no levels of, well, this trauma was worse than this trauma or this experience outweighs that experience. But your work with bereaved parents is one of those areas where I feel I told you that personally I have it challenges me and my own beliefs and my concepts, because I think sometimes it can feel like, personally I've done a lot of healing or I've gone through really hard things. And then I shared, my daughter got sick. And when that happened, it really shook me in another way that was really difficult for both my husband and I to kind of get through. And we had just come off the loss of his mom, so our parent. And even then that felt, it was horrible and tragic and awful and everything you can imagine. But we said in some ways it helped us to heal from Sally's death when our daughter got sick, because we were it was just this other level of pain that sort of dulled the harshness of what we'd been experiencing with Sally. And so I was thinking about that with the bereaved parents that you worked with, is just how you were listening to their stories. And I think that's a big component of who you are and what people noticed of you when you were even growing up or when you were in high school, is that your ability to kind of listen and hear what they were saying or weren't saying. But I'm just curious about that aspect and how that work was kind of working alongside what you and Dr. Calhoun were doing in terms of the what does it mean to be wise question.
The bereavement part certainly informed me a lot about the depth of human experience. And I got into that work because one of my colleagues who I was doing private practice with, she was working for this nonprofit that serve bereaved families, both parents and kids.
Mhm.
And she asked me to help out. And I originally thought, I remember telling her, I haven't really done that kind of work before, and I don't know how well I'd do with that.
Mhm.
But she reassured me. She said, "Oh, Rich, you'll be great. You just, you know, you learn how to do this. Don't worry, you'll be fine." I said, "Okay, I'll do that. Help out." In that organization, there's a wonderful organization called Kindermorn in Charlotte,
Hmm.
North Carolina, and worked there for 25 years doing that work. A very supportive place. It's kind of like Boulder Crest in terms of the mutual support that people have and dedication to the work.
Mhm.
But the other part of that is I had important part of my life that had to do with bereavement too.
Hmm.
So when you were talking about, coming out of high school and into college, how I got into psychology, and I had two important experiences in my senior year in high school. One is my father died,
Hmm.
and then the other is the first girl I loved died. And so that was within months of one another.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that we sort of talked about this before. I think it sort of tenderized me to this, I think, and allowed me to experience things, that were really difficult for me, and um, and allowed me, I think, when I worked with the bereaved families, to know something about, that experience and what it was like. My particular experience might have been different, but it was still, heartfelt and important to me.
Mhm.
So I think that was another entry point into psychology for me. So there's that. And the other thing I just want to mention too, I talked about my father coming from this large Italian family and everything, but it wasn't a family that was without their difficulties. So
Mhm.
my father's mother died when he was 4 years old. He was the youngest of the
The
9
9.
kids,
Mhm.
and then sometime after that, I'm not sure when, my grandfather left the family
Hmm.
and went back to Italy and remarried and started another family in New York. So he left the 9 kids, went and got married to someone else, and had more kids.
And then came back to the US?
Yes.
Oh.
And so my father and the siblings kind of raised each other at that point,
Mhm.
and he was the youngest one. So he came from some pretty poor circumstances.
Mhm.
And despite that, what I discovered later was my father had an interest in psychology, and he had these psychology books at home. And in fact, the thing that was really so striking to me was, remember when I was a sophomore in college, I was taking this course in personality, and there was a book that we were supposed to get. It was a book about the Oedipus complex,
Oh boy. Yeah.
of all things.
High school reading, light high school reading.
This was college.
I know, I'm just saying, you found
Yes.
it.
But I remember calling my mom up. I said, "Mom, this book that I'm supposed to get, I think I remember seeing that at home somewhere." And sure enough, it was one of my father's books, the
Oh.
same book. And it's just so weird.
Yeah.
My father he didn't have a high school education, um, but he's a bright guy
Mhm.
and liked to read and all that. And he was studying this stuff. And so there's that in my background, although I never talked to him about psychology,
Yeah.
but there it was. And then I got to tell you the other thing.
Yes.
As I got into this work, this was before Boulder Crest, I was working with the military.
Mhm.
And one of the things I was doing was I was going out to Hawaii to Tripler Army Medical Center out there, and I'd been doing some training for their staff. And their psychologist there, Jeff Stollerow, who was very interested in military history, and we got talking about military history.
Mhm.
And I mentioned my father was in the Marines in World War II. So he's asking about that. And he said, "Well, what have you seen your father's records? You got your father's records?" I said, "No. How do you do that?" So I got them.
Whoa.
And in the record, in his enlistment in 1942, there was a long description by the doctor who was writing the account of his enlistment and exam and whatnot. He said, I had a conversation with him, and he has an interest in psychology, and we had a discussion about these psychological concepts and all this stuff. And my father was just this poor Italian kid with not a high school education and listening to the Marines as doctors talking to him about this stuff. It's like, how could that be?
Yeah.
So anyway, I have some kind of connection through my father to psychology. And of course, the military stuff.
Yes.
My uncle tells me much later, it was long after my father had died, and he had some letters from my father when they were in World War II. He said, your father had the PTSD.
Oh.
I said, the PTSD, huh? She said, yeah. And when I look at the record, his medical record and stuff, yeah, sure. Because he was on Iwo Jima, and he had some kind of reaction, shell shock, they would call it then.
Yeah.
And so by that time, he had been on four amphibious landings in the Pacific, and that was the last one. And so anyway, there's my father's military experiences, PTSD, his interest in psychology, the fact that he dies when I'm a kid in high school. And so all this starts to connect together some way. So anyway, the bereavement experience, I think also my senior year, those deaths had, it was really tough.
Oh my gosh.
And so that was hard. And I think it helped me understand more about, people's grief and difficulties.
Yes. I really appreciate you sharing all that and kind of
So there's a lot of
walking
pieces to the puzzle there,
Yes, there
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
I was thinking about my dad, who is a first responder, and what you're saying about your dad having these books around the house that you maybe didn't see the one-to-one. He wasn't a trained psychologist, had gone to school for that. And my dad had started as a paramedic, so he had all these medical books. That's why I thought I wanted to be a nurse, is I would sit and look at these books, but it turns out in real life, the blood is a lot harder to look at. So
yes.
it just...
and it means that for people who are listening to us talking about these things, I think that's where it's important for people to look at the puzzle pieces of their own lives and try to understand themselves from the point of view of all these different influences and experiences, and maybe things that they haven't given a lot of thought to in terms of how these things have formed them into who they are and the pathways they've taken in their lives. And sometimes it's hard to know how that all happens exactly. It's a convoluted path very often, and we don't see it at the time. We're not consciously aware of some of these decisions, perhaps. I certainly wasn't consciously aware of, it's because of this, I'm going to do that. It's only in retrospect do I put the pieces together in this way that weaves this narrative, which makes some sense to me. And I think it's useful for all of us to understand ourselves from those kinds of perspectives and put that narrative together, and just appreciate yourself that way, because we're all interesting people. We've got interesting narratives,
Yeah,
So,
that's a beautiful way to express that.
yeah. So I think, as we're talking about my narrative and a little bit about yours, it's just a way of thinking through how lives get lived and where things take you, sometimes just by chance and sometimes by our own choices and decisions, and often by the influence of other people that come into our lives in ways that we don't anticipate.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the last things I wanted to ask you that's along that same line it makes me think of vicarious PTG, which is a topic we'll dive in on with Dr. Taryn Green and other researchers through the other PTG podcasts. But I'm curious, because of all these different puzzle pieces that we're talking about, is how listening to people's stories has shaped you.
That's really important, because all those people are puzzle pieces too, in a way, have influenced me and informed me and encouraged me to continue to do work in this way. So all those people I've met over the years, I don't know how many, in my private practice, in my teaching, the students that I've taught, and just all these people at Boulder Crest, all these folks from different places and times, they've all had a role in me being who I am. And I'm grateful to them for helping me understand by letting me into their lives in these different ways. One of the things about being a psychologist that's amazing is people tell you their secrets, tell you things that they don't talk to other people about. And I don't know how many times in my career I've heard people say, I've never told anyone this before. It's like, what an honor to be in a position where someone trusts you with that, something that they've been unable to talk to other people about, to be in that kind of position. So to me, it may sound strange, but it's exciting to get to know people at that sort of level where they tell you their things that they're not proud of, or they're embarrassed by, or their secrets, or their aspirations that they haven't shared, whatever that might be. So that's part of what's contributed to me being who I am now too. So I'm grateful to all those people over the years who've trusted me with themselves.
Oh, that's such a nice way to say that. Was choking me up a little bit, just because that's such a special sentiment to have, and then to pull out from yourself and other people to feel that way around you. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing a little more about you. I know you were saying, who's going to think this is interesting? But I think a lot of people think you are interesting and your story is important.
Well, that's why I'm trying to actually, as I'm talking about my story and my life and everything, I'm trying to think about how this could be important for other people who are listening to this in terms of how to think about their own lives and, their family and their friends and their colleagues and their experiences and the chance encounters they've had with people, and, how all these things contribute to who we are. So maybe other people can be thinking about themselves in these ways that might be enlightening and interesting, and encourage them to be grateful for the experiences of their lives, even the difficult ones.
Well, thank you, Rich, so much for being here and part of the Struggle Well podcast, and really sharing your story and experience to hopefully help others, which is a big part of what we're doing. And I think the other key component is that this was a little look at the man behind the science of post-traumatic growth. But if people are curious in diving more into that topic and listening from other researchers and thought leaders, they can do that with us on the PTG podcast, which you're a major part of. So we'll look forward to seeing you more over there too.
Thank you, Britt.
Thank you.